Hi, welcome to Town Meeting TV. We're here with Under the Dome, where we're going to look into what's happening in the legislature here in Vermont. And I have here today with me Representative Carol Odie from the New North End of Burlington, Representative Tiff Bloomley from generally the South End, and Rep. Bram Kleppner, also from the same district in the South End of Burlington. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
So let's just have a little introduction from each of you about what is your committee in the legislature and how has this year started off and met your expectations so far? And as our senior,
My committee is the House Ways and Means Committee, and we focus on raising revenue. And we had a little bit of a slow start this session as the governor proposed new funding formula for schools, and we waited for that funding formula to come through to us. And now we have, we've been working together collaboratively, and we will be voting out a bill on that on Tuesday morning.
And what's the makeup of that committee from the last biennium to this biennium? Are you all new folks?
Many new.
Yeah.
Only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us remain, and then the other 6 are new. 1 totally new to the legislature, and 2 totally new to the legislature, and the rest seasoned and wonderfully capable people.
Yeah.
We have a wonderful committee. Right. Wonderful. Republicans, Democrats, and we are working hard together really well.
Great, thank you. Rep. Bloomley?
Yeah, so this is my 5th year. I serve on House Appropriations and did last term. We construct the budget based on recommendations we get from the governor and from policy committees. And our committee, like yours, it's pretty new in that we lost several 5 people. 1 ran for the Senate and several other people retired. 1 left for Carol's committee. So at any rate, we have a pretty broad cross-section of experience and brought back somebody who had served on House Appropriations, left for a couple of years, and came out of retirement to serve another 2, Dave Iacovone. So.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. Bram Kleppner, your first term in the legislature,
First
right?
term,
Yep.
and it is also the first term for my committee, which is Energy and Digital Infrastructure. Some years ago, there was an Energy Committee, and at the beginning of the previous session, it was merged with the Environment Committee, given the overlap on climate between energy and environment. And that turned out to be more than one committee could manage. So this year it was split into the Energy Committee, and Digital Infrastructure was added for a number of reasons. And our committee is majority new people. It's a new committee. Therefore there's a new chair, and 5 of our 9 members are in their first term in the legislature. So we've had to learn a lot.
I've heard that from folks, that this has been a big uphill learning curve session. Tell me a little bit about, you alluded to it a little bit, but what's the relationship been like in the partisan and we hear in the press a lot of conflict between the governor and the legislature.
I'm glad you asked, because every day I make notes on the calendar. We have a calendar, and I take a printed copy, and I write down how we're passing bills from the House floor, which is a bill goes to a committee, it is worked on by the committee, goes to the House floor, it's presented by that committee, and then there's a vote. Almost all the bills pass unanimously or nearly unanimously on the House floor to go over to the Senate. And then there are a few where there are some split votes. So, that's not any different from any other session that I can remember. We work together collaboratively. We just do. Then the next thing I want to say is that we had a wonderful thing last week where we had a long-serving Republican and a long-serving Democratic representative, and they worked hard with State House people to put together an art project, and we all, between 4:30 and 5:30, more than 50 of us sat with each other, had snacks, and made art projects. And that was very important for us to be together, relaxed, and talking. We have other things going on socially and game nights and things like that, so that we are mixing together and seeing each other, not just in a committee room. That's been very important.
I just want to add, I mean, since I've been in the legislature, I don't think the Appropriations Committee has ever passed a budget unanimously, and we did this year. And it was only because everybody wanted to get to yes. And
This is the FY26 budget.
this is, yes,
yeah.
next year's budget. And it took us a while. There are a lot of needs out there, and in fact, $300 million worth of needs beyond what the governor proposed in his budget. And yet, because the Republicans on our committee and the Dems wanted to find a way forward that could unite all of us, knowing that nobody was going to like everything about the budget. It's a big bill. There's a lot in it. But we found our way to yes on the day that we voted. And that, I think, whether the governor points to that budget as displeasing or not, it was pleasing enough to our Republican colleagues, and many. We passed it, I think, 104 to 38 off the floor. I think that's a good sign that we're collaborating and we're trying to take the governor's requests really seriously.
Yeah.
I want to point out that before you started, the budget came out year after year with a unanimous vote from the House Appropriations Committee, and then on the floor was often one vote off of unanimous or nearly unanimous on the House floor. So we collaborate and get along. I know it doesn't make for a very good news story maybe, but it's what we do.
Yeah.
I would also add that in committee, even when there's, say, a 5-4 vote that's along partisan lines, it, in my experience, doesn't mean there were 5 hard yeses and 4 hard nos. You know, there's a spectrum, and there's a collaborative conversation that happens, and there's some hard yeses all the way up to on the borderline on either side, and you know the line happens to land where the partisan divide is, so it looks like a hard partisan vote, but it's not. You know, it's a vote that some people just happen to land on one side and others on the other, and it's often closer than it sounds.
Yeah. Now, the Budget Adjustment Act, walk me through that. That was just vetoed on Friday by the governor. This is the second time, and this is the making some adjustments. The FY25 budget was passed last May or June, was it?
Right.
And then things change, and we need to make an adjustment to that budget. Walk us through that, and that passed out of committee also unanimously. Went to the floor.
No, it didn't
It did not.
actually.
Okay, thank you.
It went out on partisan lines over an issue that the governor made pretty clear was not what he wanted. So the budget adjustment is a mid-year true-up. There were enormous. We committed close to $100 million to shore up nursing homes, to shore up the community health centers and other healthcare related programs. And we also had higher than anticipated technology costs across departments. And the transportation income was lower than it because of EV and the price of fuel. I mean, it's made that budget harder. So there were a number of places where we had to make changes, and the governor gave us a budget, and based on January's forecast for the end of the year,
The revenue forecast?
the revenue forecast, yeah. then carried forward $77 million to buy property taxes down, and some other tax exemptions or expansions that then we didn't touch. That was for the budget, but in terms of the BAA, we accepted most of the governor's recommendations on the first round, and the one thing that we did is we took some money that the treasurer said, I don't need this. I gave this to you in July to help with flood relief. I don't actually need it to buy down bond debt, and we invested it basically in housing, including
In the emergency housing?
in housing construction, in disability housing, and in housing, the emergency housing program. That was 1.8 million of the 14 that we committed. And the Senate concurred on those, and then we sent it to the governor. Governor said, vetoed it, came back. Our leadership then stripped out all the expenses, anything that we had changed, but left one thing in the BAA, and that is the date by which the winter emergency housing would end, and stretch that out to June 30th, knowing the impact that it would have on those families. I mean, it's been snowing over the last week, and at any rate, that was sent to the governor. It passed, the House and the Senate, and it was vetoed again by the governor. And
What happens now?
that is really a negotiation between the Speaker and the Pro Tem and the Governor, and I'm not quite sure where it goes. I mean, there are a lot of things in the budget adjustment that need to be funded, and we've taken testimony from various agency and department heads to find out, okay, what does happen when, if the budget adjustment doesn't go through and we have to incorporate the things that were in it into the budget. And, we can do that. It is more work for the state, but I feel that we did everything that we could to compromise. And it turns out that we have not spent all the money that we had budgeted for emergency housing, so we didn't even have to spend any more money. But this was the line of demarcation
It's not
for
a
the
financial-
governor.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a financial decision that's being made, it's an ideological decision,
And
a political?
well, yes, but there is no alternative that he is offering. He has not come to the legislature once over the 4 years that we've been asking for it with a proposal for moving on beyond housing people in motels. And I supported this and continue to support our position because I know what our community has had to do to try to respond to the twists and turns of policy decisions that have been made either by the governor or by the legislature. And they always say yes. The CBOEOs and the COTS and always say yes, and yet they do not have the capacity to for a political fight. To be caught in the midst of a political fight like this. And it's really unfortunate, I think, that this is where we are, but I believe that that's the governor's decision. He's made that decision.
Yeah, on the street, this looks like between April 1st and June 30th, people will run out of their days to be able to stay in the motels, and they will be out leaving the motels and be out on the streets. And I saw some of that, I believe, yesterday when I was driving, when I went to the grocery store. So, the motel program, it's something that if you're staying in a motel room, you have to contribute part of your income to that, staying there. And it isn't, no matter whether, and then the Homeless Alliance is helping people at the rate of almost several a week to move people who are there, or households who are there, into permanent housing. So until we have a new way to help people, the cost of this is a human cost. It's also a cost borne by local cities and towns where the homeless are at the moment, you know, when they get out of the motels. So last biennium, the House passed a bill that would start a program for the state to deal with homelessness. And it didn't even pass in the Senate. This year, the House just passed Vermont Hearth, and that is an acronym for something that means a state-run program to deal with homelessness.
That is a community-based.
That is community-based. If the state does not foot the bill, which is the governor has said no to that, then it is local nonprofits and municipalities who have to deal with this and foot the bill. So across our country, we see it in the newspapers. Homelessness is a nationwide and statewide problem coming home to roost on the streets of our cities. And that we have been trying to work together to solve, and we're just not there. We're putting forward plans, and they're not making it.
Yep. So the governor has come forth with a plan on education, and so you've said that you've not heard from the governor on this, and this doesn't hit energy and tech yet, housing, right? Issue of housing. Do you hear about this in your day-to-day in the legislature?
You know, we hear, in the Energy Committee, we hear about housing only in terms of weatherization, low-income weatherization programs, making low-income and moderate-income housing more energy efficient, more comfortable, more healthy. So we are working on
LIHEAP
that
program
piece
or
of it.
the
The LIHEAP program,
Yeah.
and the feds did fire everyone working on the LIHEAP program in Washington. So there will probably be more work for us to do in the state to maintain that program. But there are also proposals to add carbon pollution reduction to Efficiency Vermont's portfolio of activities, in addition to reducing electricity use and efficiency, to also add making houses more efficient in terms of weatherization, in terms of conversion from fossil fuel heat to heat pumps and things like that.
Yeah. So what I heard you say, Rep. Bloomley, is we haven't heard from the governor a proposal. Have you heard from your Republican colleagues a proposal about how to shift housing, either emergency housing or housing in general?
Well, the governor has put forward proposals for and funding appropriation proposals in his 26 budget for housing construction or rehab or development. You know, the kinds of infrastructure developments that we development that it really precipitates the housing development. So it's the emergency housing piece that the governor has not. We're a part-time legislatures. We don't execute the laws, and we have been expecting a plan forward because. And that's what we haven't gotten on the emergency housing front. I'm happy to say that, you know, in this year's budget, and I won't go, we can talk about that later, but the budget does fund about over $60 million in housing, construction, infrastructure, rehab, et cetera. And many of which were proposed by the governor, but because of other things we had to fund, weren't, you know, funded maybe in whole, but they were certainly funded in part.
So the big thing that we do hear about is education reform and this sort of sweeping set of changes that have been introduced by the governor and the new Secretary of Education. And that is that, whose committee is that hitting first, and how are you hearing about that?
Well, the bill that the Education Committee put forward has multi-parts to it, and if you want, I can go through those. But that was something that the Education Committee worked on. But it's a great opportunity that the governor's there talking where they're talking. And there have been things that we have needed to address for a long time, and now here we have the opportunity to do that. So that's a very happy story. So we're trying to solve for educational quality at a price we can afford. So all about affordability and quality. So do you want to hear the parts of that?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
So the governor called for 5 districts to be formed, and
This is down from, what do we have, 52 supervisory unions and 192 districts, something like that?
More like 110 districts.
Oh, okay, thank you.
But
Yeah.
so we have said we'd like to empower a group of retired school superintendents and retired business managers to divide up the state. We'll need the superintendents because they know about governing, and so do the school, so do the business managers, but the business managers know a lot about the numbers. So we're going to try, we're asking them to give us 3 versions of how the state can be divided, and they can consider that 4,000 students has proven to be an opportune size for a school district. This is what we've heard from our Vermont Principals Association. So we're really, the stakeholders have come to us and said no to 5, and are going to help us figure out what another idea might be, 3 other ideas. So we'll look at those next year. Second,
Will that be a legislative study committee or
it's a
summer?
It's a study committee that is part of the school.
Commission on the Future
Commission
of
on the Future.
Education.
There we go. Thank you. Then it's to achieve cost effectiveness across the state and to have improved student experiences and more access to educational opportunity. The House plan has said for kindergarten, the minimum class size would be 12 students. For grades 1 to 4, 15 students. Grades 5 to 12, 18 students. And then in multi-age classrooms would be limited to 2 grades per class. And that schools for grades 6 to 12 should be about 450 students or more. That's aspirational.
So this is this is not the governor's proposal. This is a proposal coming out of the House?
Right.
Okay.
What the governor's proposing higher numbers than we are.
Yeah.
And then several sections of the bill address facility needs. So a new state aid for school construction. That's intent language, not shall language at this point. There's a lot of work that has to be done there. And fourth, prioritizing public schools in Vermont to be receiving tuition dollars. And we are prohibiting the use of tuition dollars to be used for independent schools out of state. So you can't send a child to Switzerland and have the money follow them anymore. And then there's...
Is there an exception on that for folks that are like, their school district isn't meeting their needs specifically? I know there's conversation about like exempting Burr & Burton Academy or St. Johnsbury Academy.
They are,
but if
they are approved independent schools.
Yeah, but if a student is in a school district and the local school isn't able to meet their special ed needs or their particular needs, is that considered?
That's considered.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then there'll be improved statewide systems and governance, such as a uniform school calendar and graduation requirements. These things may or may not make it because there's considerable work and considerable pushback on each of the things I've mentioned. So that's basically what's in their proposal that's in the bill. And the bill is now in my committee, and now we have been working. We received the numbers in the beginning of the week, and we will be voting out tomorrow numbers.
So this bill, help me understand, this bill is proposing a study of this. It's not pushing this through.
Some of the things are absolutely in the statute.
Okay.
The study is going to be whether it's fewer than 5 districts, more than 5 districts.
Got it.
That we've heard from the field is too large of a district.
Yeah.
Principals say it's too large. Superintendents say it's too large. So the retired superintendents and the retired business managers, 3 of each, will be doing the work. It's not really so much a study as they're going to get the work done.
Got it.
And come up with 3 options. This will have a big impact on how we raise money for this proposal.
And if I might just add, I'm on an education funding working group in addition to my committee, and the governor and the Senate Education Committee, for that matter, would like to get maps drawn of new district, decision on how many, and get the maps drawn this session. And that's a really complicated process, and it's easy to screw up. You have all sorts of questions in terms of how long are kids going to be on the bus to get to and from school, and as you draw a bigger district that includes a bunch of current districts, they have different levels of debt that are owed to different people. How do you merge that into one district? And 100 other questions like that. And I think the House Education Committee feels very strongly that it's worth taking 8 months to figure out something that's going to affect our schools for 40 years probably, and to not rush this and to really do everything we can to get it right.
Do you all feel like you're solving the same problem? Do you all feel like, the governor's come in to say we need to solve this question of this crisis of affordability for education, and the crisis is an affordability crisis on Vermonters. Do you all feel like you're solving the same problem together?
I think that we are.
Yeah, and I also think that consolidation in and of itself doesn't initially save money, because there's a lot that there's a lot that goes into consolidating districts, and you're going to maybe spend more on transportation in that. They're just it would be. I think in the long run it will.
What are the cost drivers? What is the thing that's costing? What's
Well,
driving the?
If we could solve health insurance, that would go a long way to making the school budget more affordable.
So so should we segue? Yeah, go ahead.
Segue
And
into your
other things that have to be figured out. We're suggesting from our committee that we go with a cost-based figure of $15,033 for each foundation amount for each pupil, and then that would be adjusted up for students who have special circumstances so that they can be have enough resources to be taught.
And we should
universal-
probably take one step back and
Yeah.
Okay.
talk about what is a foundation amount, since
Go ahead.
I'd be delighted to, Carol. Thank you, Representative Odie. So the way we do school funding now is unique in all the world, that 110 school districts pass their budgets however they want, they fight about it, they pass it, and then they mail the invoices to Montpelier, and state government has to find the money to pay for them all. And almost every other state does it the other way around, where the state says to the district, here's how much money you have this year. And that amount of money is based on the number of students they have, and with some weighting, acknowledging that some students cost more to educate than others, English language learners, for instance. But so there's a set amount per student that gets adjusted for those things, and then that's how much you get. And that's called a foundation formula versus how we do it now. And the governor proposed a foundation formula, and I think House Ways and Means has ideas about how to improve the governor's suggestion.
Well, we're going to get to his suggestion. The first phase is we're going to go with a cost-based foundation amount, and that will be based on what it costs today to educate
And how wildly
students.
different are are people
Not that-
spending across the
not
state
that different.
currently?
Oh, people spending from district to district?
Yeah.
Well, there are some who are quite low, some that are quite high, and then it goes a lot in the middle,
Yeah.
you know, per pupil.
And is it like $12,000 to $18,000 the range right
Yeah,
now?
I
Something
think
like
that's
that?
right.
Yeah.
So this wouldn't have it shouldn't be a big shock for folks.
Oh, everything is shocking.
Okay.
I think it's a big
Why?
deal.
Why is it
It's
so
a big
shocking?
deal.
Why is it
It
so
would
hard?
be a big deal if
Yeah.
you are spending 18 and then you're handed 14.
Yeah.
Then you have to figure out what you're going to cut and whether the district, and when I say district, I don't mean, I mean the geographical area that's now going to share tax base to raise additional funds from what you're going to be given for your foundation amount. If you have been spending much lower, you're going to get a lot more money. If you were spending at 13 and then suddenly you get 15 per student, you're going to have a lot of money. So I've spoken to Zoe Saunders and said, what help will they get so they know what to do with the extra money that they'll get? And she said, yes, the Agency of Education needs more staff so they can really go in and help those districts so that they can allocate those funds in a way that really makes a difference for teaching and learning.
So this has to do with if you have students that have people waiting that say you deserve more money to get more education for this student, you want to make sure that money is being applied appropriately to those students' needs. Is that what
That
you're saying?
too, that's helpful too.
Okay.
You said, is it going to be that, you know, earth-shaking or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, yeah.
And so if you suddenly get $2,000 more per student to spend than you had been spending, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
People need help with how to allocate those dollars. If you're going to be getting $3,000 less than you were getting per pupil, you have to figure out what you're going to do about that, and you have choices. One would be to cut, and then you can, or you can, with your district, decide, the new district that hasn't been created yet, because we don't know how big they are going to be or where their lines will be drawn. They'll have to decide, well, should we ask our taxpayers for a supplemental district spending amount on top of what we already have? So there could be places that have to raise a little extra on top of what the foundation amount is to fully fund their budgets. So this is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. We started to talk about the big driving cost of healthcare. What's happening? I mean, I know we're trying to solve all of it in 45 minutes here.
But to
yeah.
briefly say, that foundation amount that we are
Yep.
suggesting we start with, that is low. That's higher than the governor's amount, and his amount. We call it cost-based because it's what the costs are today, and we're going to be striving to get to the evidence base. Is what his amount by his consultants have said that we should get to, we should use. And we're saying, okay, we'll start at the cost base, get to the evidence base, and we're going to do that by addressing some things. One of them would be healthcare, another would be special education, flexible spending, flexible pathways, vouchers at pre-kindergarten, Act 166, enrollment, and early college are just a few things that we have to dive deep into. We have to figure out how those should be funded, how we should deal with those, and as we do that, you hope that the costs will be brought down to the model that the governor is advocating for now. So it would be a glide path from one amount to the other, saving money along the way.
And that evidence-based is a lower
That's a bit lower.
And when you say evidence-based, that means something to me. What does that mean in this
It's
context?
just a formula thought up by a Picus, a gentleman named Picus, and a firm that he works with, that they are looking at what other foundation formulas are in other states, and you can't compare from state to state because different states spend money on schools in different ways. We take all the tax base of the state, bring it together, and then give it out. Other places, they have different property taxes in different places. Our state, we have been using education fund dollars to pay for mental health services, and in another state, they do that out of their general fund, not out of their education fund. So we have differences. So, but the happy news is that the cost basis is our figures put together by Tammy Colby, Dr. Tammy Colby, and follow the weighting study that she and another Rutgers professor put together for the state as part of the weighting study a few years ago. And it is exactly that study that gave us the updated correct weights for students. That super has wonderfully impacted Burlington, where we now have a greater weight than we had for 28 years. For EL students, a better weight for poverty, students in poverty, and so forth. This will give us, whether under the current formula or the one we're transitioning to, we have to keep those weights so that Burlington Burlington taxpayers and children will benefit. This year was the first year that the weights are put in, and even though we're building a high school, and even though we have increased needs, we voted a budget in that's a 5% decrease for people's taxes.
Yeah.
So the weights are a very big deal.
And have those numbers come back from the state yet? I know we vote on the budget, and the budget, when do those numbers come back from the state to say what our actual tax rate is going to be?
Well,
Right
we
about
passed
now?
the yield bill. No, it still will be a while. And the unfortunate part is that the federal government is now, we can't count on what they're going to be providing us. So we'll have to figure out what to do if they cut funding, because then it may entail our raising more money as a state to pay for the missing federal funds.
That's a lot. Thank you.
It's a lot. It's
lot,
all
yeah.
a lot.
So can we segue quickly into healthcare? Just like what's happening, what are you all hearing, and what's happening around healthcare reforms? Is there any hope?
Well, I know that there are a number of people, the chair of the healthcare committee and her committee members and our caucus leadership that are working with the Green Mountain Care Board and the administration to really assess where we go from here. I mean, I think the recent agreement between Green Mountain Care Board and UVM Medical Center is, goes part of the distance towards shoring up Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has been on very shaky ground over the last 6 months because of higher utilization rates and the cost of the services that have been provided, and also primary care physicians will benefit from that agreement as well. But I mean, some of this has to be resolved at the federal level, and our ability to cover the health care needs of our most vulnerable folks is completely dependent upon what happens at the federal level. If Medicaid, for every 1% federal match, we lose $20 million. That's an extraordinary cost for a state. And our state, we can't take $100 million, $200 million hit and just fill that hole with reserves and rainy day fund, et cetera. So we're hopeful that it won't come to pass, that we have to deal with that kind of a cut. But my committee is working with the administration right now to try to ascertain, what what do you prioritize if, in fact, we face a cut in the federal match rate of X? How do we sort through that? And I think that there are some on my committee who are expecting we're going to have to pass 2 budgets, maybe 3 this year, given the rollout of the federal budget and executive orders that
So
have
you're
been
doing
coming
some
down.
preliminary
Yeah, a lot
budget
of it.
adjustment based on.
And I don't know if you have something to add to that.
I would completely agree that much of healthcare would be much more easily solved at the federal level if there were a federal government interested in solving it. And some of it we can solve here, though, however. Vermont has among the highest spending on healthcare per capita in the country, and our hospital, among its peer hospitals, is one of the more expensive. I think something like 80% of similar hospitals are able to break even at Medicare reimbursement rates. And this hospital is not. It loses a lot of money at Medicare reimbursement rates and has to charge private insurance more, which puts Blue Cross Blue Shield into a financial bind and so forth. So I think that part of it's solvable. There are some other statewide healthcare reforms that we can enact. I will say the chair of the Green Mountain Board, Owen Foster, is, in my experience with him, is he's completely non-ideological, and he is completely committed to making the healthcare system work for Vermonters. And I think there is hope that we will make some progress on bringing down the cost of healthcare.
What are you hearing in the halls around the impact of federal funding cuts, federal funding threats, just sort of the tenor of the situation in Washington, D.C. right now? And how are you? I hear you saying that you're thinking about it and responding and preparing for some budget adjustments if we see.
I think that there's a lot of kind of, there's a lot of strategizing that's happening now. I mean, it's not only looking at lost kind of federal revenues, but lost tourism money, a loss in other forms of income that that we would count on. So I think it's going to be really critical for both bodies and the governor to really share information in a very timely way and not sugarcoat anything, and set priorities together so that we're not fighting about the priorities. We're using our time to address the needs that are there. And I think that's why my committee is doing the work it's doing right now, and the Senate is joining in that. I think that our nonprofit partners, the folks that we really depend on to provide a lot of the social safety net in our communities, I think that they are stretched to the max. They are also losing money and would stand to lose money with federal cuts. So, I mean, and I really think that Sarah Clark, who is Secretary of Administration, and she, her word to my committee was, we are concerned, and yet we are not immediately responding to every rumor and because we could drive ourselves crazy doing that. And we've seen already things change from one day to the next. The rhetoric changes. But what everybody does seem to agree about is that we will face some significant cuts and we will have hard choices to make. And and we may be called back into session, if not 1, maybe 2 times between now and January.
I would also add on the theme of not sugarcoating that federal cuts are going to hurt. And Vermonters will suffer in many ways, and some will die unnecessarily. And it is our job as a legislature and administration to minimize the damage, but we won't be able to prevent it or offset it. You know, we're just minimizing it in terms of the cuts to federal funds to Vermont. I think minimizing the damage is the best that we will be able to do.
We have a $9 billion budget, and of that budget, how much of that is federal funds?
A little over $2 billion.
Okay. $2 billion. Great. Carol, did you want to, what are you hearing about the federal impacts?
What makes me happy is that the governor has decided to ask for hospital direct payments. And that's something that our UVM Medical Center asked for a number of years ago. And so there are 3 places that health care is paid for: Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial insurance. So Medicaid reimburses here to hospitals, and commercial insurance here.
Yeah.
So that difference, the hospital direct payment program is meant to, it gives money to the hospitals to make up that difference. With that money, not only is that difference made up, but the hospital, UVM hospital, is then able to give out millions of dollars to other hospitals because they brought that money in. So that is very important for affordability, and something that I personally have been very committed to seeing happen.
And this is legislation, this is proposed
No,
legislation,
unfortunately,
or it's not,
we can't do this.
Yeah.
This is something that Agency of Human Services Secretary has to go forward with.
Well, also
But
add
we've been working with her.
the direct payments to make up what hospitals lose on Medicaid reimbursement. You know, they lose money on that, and they have to make it up by charging Blue Cross Blue Shield more.
Yeah.
So if we are paying them adequately for the Medicaid patients, they don't have to shift the cost. So private insurance for small businesses and individuals can come down.
but it's also important to sort of check in on cost spikes around the state, right? So there's this issue of charging similar amounts for
Yes.
similar procedures.
Yes, the reference-based
Yeah.
pricing,
Yeah.
as it's called, because you can go for an MRI to one place and they'll charge you $8,000, and another place they'll charge you $1,200, and across the lake they'll charge you $200.
Wow.
And it is for exactly the same machine and the same technician hitting the same button.
Yeah.
So clearly there are savings to be had in that system.
So I know there's so much to cover, but I'm just curious, in your work that you're doing in Montpelier, you're there from January until maybe you're going to get out in June. We'll see if you get to leave then. So it's a part-time citizen legislature. People are there all the time. People are getting your ear, trying to talk with you. Who are you hearing from, and who are you not hearing from in your committee rooms? The legislature has one task, really, is to pass the budget and to do, but you also are doing a lot more than that, right?
Yeah.
So who are you hearing from, and who are you not hearing from when you're in those committee rooms? Who do you need to hear from?
Well, I can speak for my own committee. You know, we had, I think, well over 250 witnesses come to speak, either through public hearings that we held, legislators who came in to talk about, you know, the thing that they really wanted to make sure was in the budget, and administration personnel. And so that's a lot of people. The folks who have the longest, have the loudest voices are folks who can afford to have a lobbyist. I think our chairs make a real effort to try to get a diversity of the voices in their committee rooms to inform policy. But it's always going to be a challenge for folks who don't have power, who are not used to going to Montpelier, who don't even know they could try to sign up to testify. I mean, when we have public hearings, we try to put it out on front porch forums so people know they can sign up. And I think that we're way more accessible since COVID. with live stream, I mean, because we're streaming and people can just zoom right in, but it's not perfect.
Well, when we talk about class sizes, then rural schools are concerned about whether they might have to close. When we talk about anything having to do with education, we hear from school boards, superintendents, principals, business managers. We had actually a number of those who are unhoused or were about to lose their housing came and sat in the gallery up above the floor and were introduced by House members, and the House members told their stories. You know, a single mom, a man who was on oxygen, a veteran who has a severe disability, and so it will put a name, a face, and a story behind the decisions that we're making. We hear from listers, if we're talking about how we might change the way we do reappraisals in the state. We hear from the Public Assets Institute, which is very committed to low income and middle income needs. So we get quite a bit of different testimony, and we see hundreds of people in the State House.
Yeah.
I would, on the subject of the people who are at risk of losing their housing who came and joined us on the House floor, a couple themes really emerged. One was that almost 2-1, they were lifelong Vermonters. And there's concern out there that people are being drawn from out of state because of our generous benefits, but we're really talking about lifelong Vermonters. And almost 2-1, they had worked hard and had become unhoused through a couple of bad circumstances, a medical bankruptcy, a divorce, a disability, that just a landlord who sold a building, a couple things combined, and it could have been any of us who ended up in that situation. It was really striking hearing from them. In the Energy Committee, I think it's absolutely true. Our chairs try very hard to make sure we're hearing from all sides. When we're looking at energy policy, we hear from the environmental advocates, but we also hear from the fuel dealers and the auto dealers. We hear from the utilities, and we hear from consumer advocates. So again, a variety of people testifying on all sides of the issues in the bills.
Well, thank you all for joining us, digging in as much as we can to really big topics, and for your service to the state and your constituents. If folks want to reach you, of course, they can go to the website and reach out to you on your legislative email, right? And as you were saying, come to the State House. State House is open, and visit there. And thank you all for watching. We'll be doing more programs like this with the Chittenden County Legislative Delegation here at Town Meeting Television. You can watch this and other programs at www.cctv.org. Thank you all.
Thank you.
so
Thanks
much.
for this service.
Thank you.
Thanks to CCTV, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Yes,
Great,
very
thanks.
much.